Okay, hello there, everybody. We are recording. I am doing this recorded lecture to go over the cost variances and then also the journal entries that we use to record those variances. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and then once I'm finished with this recorded lecture, I will send you this Excel file with the answers as well. So let me share my screen with you and get this pulled up. So this is the Excel file that we have available to us for this chapter. And we started getting some practice with this in class. So we're going to go through the remaining exercises here and get a little bit more practice with this. So this one, I couldn't remember if we plugged the numbers in or not, if we got to this one in class. So I am going to go ahead and redo it and then just show us what this journal entry would look like. So I know we talked about these variances and basically, what we're doing with these variances um, is determining whether we were favorable or unfavorable. In other words, whether we met the standard or went over or under the standard budget, standard. So this one we're practicing the direct labor variances. So it says the following information describes a company's direct labor usage in a recent period. Compute the direct labor rate and efficiency variances for the period and classify each as either favorable or unfavorable. So a couple things, just before we plug any numbers in, and we are going to plug the numbers in, of course, but before we do, remember that our direct labor variances, we can divide these up into a labor rate variance or a labor efficiency variance. Okay. So that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at dividing this overall direct labor variance into either a labor, oh, hold on, let me get my pen pulled up here. Into either a labor rate variance or a labor efficiency variance. Right? That's what we're looking at dividing this up into. And then the formula for this, and I know that we looked at this formula a couple different ways together, but since we're computing both of these, I'm going to set this formula up for us. And so for our labor rate variance, we're going to be looking at our actual hours times our actual rate, right? And then we're going to compare that to our actual hours times the standard rate, right? So actual hours times actual rate. And then we're going to compare that to actual hours times the standard rate. And then we're going to compare that to the standard hours times the standard rate. So there are our formulas that we use to break down these variances. All right, so before we even plug the numbers in, and again, we're going to plug the numbers in, we're going to do the math, but let's think about this rate variance. So our standard is $14 per direct labor hour. That's what our budget would have been based on, right? The standard is where we get our budget information, right? That's what our budget would have been based on. However, as we can see here, the actual was 15. So budget was 14, actual was 15. Hopefully, we're thinking in our brains this is going to be an unfavorable variance, right? This is going to be negative, right? Unfavorable variance. So, just to kind of remind our brains about that. The other part of this, the efficiency variance. So According to how many units we produced, our budget would have been based on 67,000 direct labor hours, right? That's our standard direct labor hours for the number of units produced, right? However, our actual was 65. So we were more efficient, right? And so again, without even plugging the numbers in, right, we can make some educated guesses, right? So okay, let's plug the numbers in. So actual hours 65,000 times the actual rate 15. So there's that first one. Actual hours 65,000 times the standard rate 14. And then standard hours 67,000 times the standard rate 14 is how we plug those numbers in, right? And so if we take our, and I'm just getting my calculator out here, if we take our 65,000 times 15, this is going to give us 975,000 was our actual. Okay. If we take 65,000 times 14, 910,000 is what it should have been based on our standard rate. And then if we take 67,000 times 14, 938,000. Okay. Now we're going to compare these two for our labor rate variance. Okay. So let me get my different color pulled up. So we're going to compare these two for our labor rate variance. And so the difference between these two numbers, right? 65,000. All right, but let's think about this. So our actual hours based on our standard rate, we should have spent 910,000, right? Based on our actual hours and that standard rate, we should have spent 910,000. However, our actual hours, actual rate, we spent 975. So again, this is an unfavorable variance. And we'll be more specific. We'll say unfavorable rate variance. Right? All right, now we're comparing these two. And let me get my eraser pulled up and erase these highlights. Okay. Now we're comparing these two for our efficiency variance, okay? And let's think about this efficiency variance. So the difference between these two numbers, 938,000 versus 910,000, the difference is 28,000, right? That difference is 28,000. Now let's think about this. Was it unfavorable or favorable? So according to our standard, we should have, to produce the number of units we produce, use 67,000 direct labor hours, which would have been 938,000 based on our 14 bucks an hour, right? Our budget based on that number of hours, 938,000. However, we were more efficient because we actually did it in 65,000 hours, right? Instead of 67,000 direct labor hours, we actually did it in 65,000 direct labor hours. So this is a favorable efficiency variance. EFFICIENC, efficiency variance. Okay. Like I said, I couldn't remember if we got to this one in class or not, so I wanted to go through it again. We're going to get some little bit more practice with it. But the one thing we didn't do yet is look at, okay, so how do we record this? And let me back up 1 second because I haven't done the overall here, right? Because now we compare 65,000, 28,000. That gives us our overall labor, right? Labor cost variance, right? So we broke it down into a rate variance and efficiency variance, but the overall, the combination of these two, we got to think about that 65,000 like a negative, right? So 65,000 negative, and then plus that 28,000 or we still have overall 37,000 unfavorable direct labor variance. So this 37,000, like we said, that's what would actually show up on the flexible budget performance report. But then again, we could break that 37,000 down into a rate variance or an efficiency variance. So that's what we're looking at. Now, again, excuse me. One thing we didn't do in class is look at how we would record these. And so we're going to add that into here, and I'm just going to scroll over a little bit and show you how we would record this. Let me back out of this, zoom out just a little, so maybe we can still see all of the numbers here. So for this one, what we're going to do, and we're going to see this with the material variances as well, but we're going to debit work in process for the standard amount, right? We're going to debit work in process for the standard amount. And so in this case, that standard amount, the 938,000, right? That was the standard hours times the standard rate, okay? And now if it's an unfavorable variance, we debit the variance. If it's a favorable variance, we credit the variance. So let me show you what I mean by that. So this 65,000 unfavorable, because it's unfavorable, we're going to debit the labor rate variance. This one over here, since it's favorable, we're going to credit, right? So we debit this, we credit that, right? And that's going to be the case with the material variances as well, as we're going to see. So we're going to debit labor rate variance 65,000. Oops. Went one too many. 65,000. We're going to credit labor efficiency variance 28,000. And then we credit the actual for factory payroll. That actual amount being actual hours times actual rate, 975,000 is how we would record that transaction. That usage of labor, right? So not too bad. Let's look at another problem. And this problem, we're going to calculate the standard cost per unit. Then we're going to calculate our material variances, and then we're going to calculate our labor variances. So I'm going to scroll down here. So the first part of this, and let me zoom in here as much as I can. The first part of this is calculating the standard cost per unit. And remember, like we said, and I'll just type this one in, but our standard cost per unit, and this is what our budget data would be based on, right? Budget data is made up of direct material per unit, direct labor per unit, factory overhead per unit. Okay. So looking up here, for the material cost, right? Our standard is each unit requires 6 pounds of material. Each pound costs $8. And let me go ahead and change this to currency because we want it to show up as currency. Okay, so each unit requires 6 pounds, and each pound costs $8. So our direct material per unit is 6 times 8. $48 is what our material cost us per unit. Okay. Now labor, same deal, right? Here's our labor. So each unit requires 2 hours of direct labor at 16 per hour. Okay. Same thing with factory overhead. Each unit we charge 2 hours at $12 an hour. 24. Now the combination of all of these is our standard cost per unit equals our material plus labor plus overhead, right? Easy peasy. $104. And again, this is what our budgeted data would be based on, the standard, right? Now, a couple things, and we're getting ready to plug the numbers in, and we're going to see this, but I want to point this out to you real quick. Remember, we can make some educated guesses about what happened, but before we even plug in any numbers. So, if we had a standard of $8 per pound, our actual is $8.10 a pound. Again, this is going to be unfavorable, right? But before we plug any numbers in, we can see it unfavorable, right? The other side of this, which again, we're going to plug the numbers in, we're going to get practice with it, is the labor, right? So, each unit requires 2 hours of direct labor. We produced 8,000 units. So 8,000 units times 2 hours per unit, we should have used 16,000 direct labor hours. But we actually did it in 15,700. So we were more efficient. That's going to be a favorable variance there, right? The other part of this, again, we can make educated guesses here. We had a standard of $16 per hour. We actually spent $16.50. Again, that's going to be unfavorable. And then material usage or quantity, 6 pounds of material per unit. We produced 8,000 units, so 8,000 units times 6. We should have used only 48,000 pounds of material. We actually used 48.5. So, again, before we even plug any of the numbers in, we can make some guesses there, right? So now using that information, we're going to calculate our direct material variances, right? So remember that we can break down these variances into a price variance. So direct material price variance. Or we can break it down into a direct material quantity variance. Okay. Now let me plug in the formula here, and then we'll put some numbers with it. So for this price variance, we need to take actual quantity times actual price, and then we're going to compare that to actual quantity times standard price, and then we're going to compare that to standard quantity times standard price. since we're breaking these variances down, right? We can use all three of these calculations together to compare them. Okay, so let's plug in our numbers here. So, um actual quantity now, again, actual quantity, and we're focused now right now on this direct material line item, right? That's what we're computing our direct material variances, okay? So, actual quantity, 48,500 pounds times actual price, $8.10 a pound. Okay, actual quantity, 48,500 pounds times the standard price, $8. And again, for this quantity variance, we can go ahead and plug in also standard quantity. Now again, each unit is supposed to take 6 pounds of material. We produced 8,000 units. So 8,000 units times $6, we should have used 48,000 pounds. So that would have been our standard quantity for that number of units produced. Standard price 8. Okay, so we've plugged all of our numbers in here. Now it's just a matter of doing the math. So 48,500 times 8.1. So here we get 392,850, right? Now 48,500 times 8, based on that number of pounds used, it should have been 388,000. And then we're going to compare that to standard quantity, standard price. So the standard quantity was 48,000 times $8, 384. Okay, there are our numbers, right? If we do the math on it. So now to get this price variance, we're looking at the combination of these two items. And so the difference here, if we take 392,850 minus 388,000, so the difference here is 4,850. And again, if we think about this, based on the actual quantity of pounds, multiplied by that standard price, we should have spent 388,000, right? Based on the actual quantity. But actual quantity times actual price, we actually spent 392,850, right? So this is an unfavorable price variance. Okay. Now, if we look at now, compare that to that actual quantity times standard price, right? And we compare that to standard quantity times standard price. If we think about this, so the difference between 388,000, 384,000, 4,000. And again, based on those number of units, standard quantity times standard price, we should have spent 384,000, right? That's that standard quantity, 48,000. But our actual quantity was 48.5, so we spent 388. So again, this is also an unfavorable direct material quantity variance, right? And again, if we think about this, like these are both negative numbers. They're both unfavorable. So overall, the combination of these two, 8,850, unfavorable direct material variance, right? So this 8850 this is what would actually show up on our flexible budget performance report, the 8850. But then again, we would break that down and we would go, oh, okay, well, 4850 was unfavorable because of the price. 4000 was unfavorable because of the quantity, right? We'd break that down. Now, real quick, just like we did on the labor variance, let me show you what this entry would look like, and I'll just type it in here. So remember, if it's an unfavorable variance, then we debit the variance, right? If it's favorable, we credit. But obviously, we've got two unfavorables here, but we're going to debit work in process for the standard amount. 384,000 would have been our standard. And again, unfavorable variances we debit. So we're going to debit direct material price variance. $48.50. We're going to debit direct material quantity variance. 4,000. And then we credit materials for the actual amount used. And of course, when I go this way, then it takes the picture away. But the actual, which was 392,850. Materials, material inventory, right? Our materials account is what that one would look like. Not too bad. All right, let's do one more of these. And again, we just saw this one. We're taking this same information, but now, holy smokes, how far to go? We're taking the same information, same company, but now we're going to plug in the labor, calculate those labor variances. So again, that formula, we're going to have a direct labor rate variance. We're going to have a direct labor efficiency variance. And that formula for us, we're going to take for the rate variance, actual hours times actual rate. We're going to compare that to actual hours times the standard rate. And then we're going to compare that to standard hours times standard rate. All right, let's plug some numbers in here. So actual hours, and now we're on this direct labor line, right? So actual hours, 15,700 times actual rate, 1,650. Okay. Actual hours, 15,700 times standard rate, 16. And then standard hours, and again, our standard hours. So each unit takes 2 hours. We produced 8,000 units. So 8,000 times 2, we should have had 16,000 standard hours times the standard rate. All right, there's our numbers plugged in. And now it's just a matter of doing the math here. So 15,700 times 16.5. 259,050 actual hours times actual rate. Actual hours times standard rate, we would have gotten 251,200. Obviously, we've got an unfavorable rate variance, right? And then standard hours, 16,000 times $16 an hour, 256,000. Based on the number of units, we actually did it in 15,700. So again, more efficient, right? So Now we can take the difference between our actual hours actual rate and our actual hours standard rate. If we take 259,050 minus 251,200, 7850 is our direct labor rate variance. And again, this is unfavorable, right? We talked about that. We had a standard rate of 16. We actually paid 1650. So unfavorable, right? Okay. Now we can take the difference between these two. So 256,000 minus 251,200. Here, 4,800. And this one is favorable. Favorable because again, like we talked about, based on the number of units we produced, we should have used 16,000 direct labor hours. We actually only used 15,700. So we were more efficient, right? That was favorable. We were more efficient. So we think about this like, okay, we've got 7,850 negative. Now we've got a positive 4,800, right? So 7,850 plus, no, that's not what we want to do. 7,850 minus 4,800. So overall, 3,050 unfavorable still, right? Because our unfavorable number was greater. So we're still unfavorable. Direct labor cost variance. So again, this is what would show up on that flexible budget performance report. We would have that 3,050, right? Flexible budget performance report. But then once we plug the numbers in and did the math, we'd determine, okay, well, we had an unfavorable rate variance, and maybe we can explain that away. But we were more efficient, right? We had a favorable efficiency variance. All right, one more time, this journal entry, and let me zoom out of this a little bit so I can hopefully keep all the numbers pulled up. So remember that we're going to debit work in process for the standard amount, standard being 256,000, right? If it is an unfavorable variance, then we're debiting. If it's a favorable variance, we're crediting. So we're going to debit direct labor rate variance, 7,850. We're going to credit direct labor efficiency variance, 4,800. And then we credit factory payroll or factory wages, right? Whatever the company calls that account, for the actual 259,050 is what that would look like. So anyway, I will stop there. I am going to send this out to everybody with the Excel file with all of the answers. And as always, if you have any questions, you know where to find me. I'll see you in class. Bye-bye.